So, how has this pandemic affected our country's next generation of leaders? To try and help answer that question, we bring in former Education Secretary in the Obama administration, Secretary John King. I also want to bring in Naomi Martin. Naomi is a reporter for the Boston Globe's Great Divide team, covering the intersection of race, inequality, and public education. Naomi, let me start with you, because your team at the Boston Globe wrote about a Gallup survey of Massachusetts high school students on how they are feeling doing this remote learning and in-person learning, or a hybrid of both, which is something that we've all dealt with, the hybrid model. But it found that 33% of high schoolers learning remotely or in hybrid models, 33% feel left behind academically, while that number was just 8% for kids doing in-person learning. Walk us through what else you found.
Yeah, thank you. We know that kids learning remotely also felt less excited about what they're learning. They feel less challenged in a good way. They feel less motivated to care about their schoolwork. And, these are all kind of really troubling indicators for their futures, because, they're missing out on crucial material now. And some students who are at the age of getting jobs have turned more to jobs as a means of supporting themselves. And so that could lead to a higher dropout rate, and so more students would not have the education they need to, pursue the careers that they would dream of.
Secretary King, what do you make of this disparity in learning for online versus in person? I mean, how big of a problem are we looking at long term?
It's a big problem. If we look at some of the recent studies, for example, from McKinsey, we see suggestions that particularly students of color may have lost as much as 6 to 12 months of learning. And it's really unfinished instruction. It's not their fault, but it's a result of students not having internet access, some students having to work, students who are struggling with the impact of the health consequences and economic consequences of COVID. So we're going to need to really have a massive national effort to make up for this time.
I mean, but here's the other part of it, Secretary King. I mean, how much of it also is a result of, some kids just don't learn well that way. It's just not as effective for one kid to learn through a screen compared to, to another kid.
Well, there's no question that online learning is no substitute for in-classroom learning. It's one of the reasons we've got to do everything possible to get students safely back to school as quickly as we can. I'm glad the administration has prioritized vaccines for teachers. That will help us get more quickly back to school. But look, we know students learn best when they're in classrooms with great teachers and with their peers, where they're learning in community with other students.
This pandemic has seen an unprecedented number of students who have gone missing since March of last year, just missing. The Washington Post reports that in Detroit, quote, some of the children on the list had worrisome numbers of absences this early on in the school year, but there were 3,000 students that the district couldn't account for at all. Boston Globe found that, quote, 2 out of 5 high school juniors and seniors in Boston public schools were chronically absent from school in the fall, a sharp rise from pre-pandemic absentee rates. Secretary, how can it be that kids just are going unaccounted for? How do we fix that?
Well, I mean, this is a national shame, a national embarrassment. We failed as a country last year to make sure that every student had access to the internet and access to a device. As a result, we have kids who literally haven't logged in to online school since last March. So we really need now to invest in reconnecting students with school. The $1.9 trillion package that Congress is working through will provide resources that school districts can use to create mentoring relationships to reconnect kids with school, programs over the summer that would blend academics and arts and other enrichment activities to get kids back reconnected, and tutoring. We really need to mobilize a national core of tutors to help students make up academic ground, but also to create those positive relationships that will help them feel better about school and more engaged with school.
Naomi, based on your reporting, have you seen any creative solutions to this problem? Any districts or schools or teachers that are having success with retention during this pandemic?
Yeah, we actually have a district in our area. It's called Brockton. It's about 40 minutes south of Boston. They're a large urban district, majority Black students, and they've actually mobilized a large tutoring program similar to what Secretary was just speaking about. But they've had it in place this whole time, and their superintendent there says they've had great results with it. They've used their money to part of it to pay for overtime for teachers to do one-on-one tutoring session with students. And so they haven't seen as dramatic losses as they expected to during this time. So maybe that's something that other districts can think about doing as well.
Naomi, as you know, Massachusetts school officials just announced that schools can postpone statewide testing because of the pandemic, and it comes just weeks after the new administration announced that states must continue with annual testing, but can apply to be exempted from certain accountability measures tied to the results. From your reporting, do you think that kids feel ready for these kinds of statewide tests, these major tests?
I mean, I don't think kids ever loved these tests to begin with. I remember hating them as a kid myself. But, you know, I think, no, the pandemic obviously hasn't made it any better. I think teachers feel, and I've heard this from students too, that they just have too much material to try to cram into the limited screen time and attention span that any kid can take online right now. And so to try to cram in more test prep is sort of demoralizing to a lot of teachers and students. But I understand on the flip side, people are saying that we do need to understand how big the gaps have grown, because we all believe that the gaps have grown wider during the pandemic between affluent students and lower income students. And so let's just, take the pulse of that is sort of the argument for doing these, tests.
Naomi Martin, thank you. And John King, a big thanks to you as well. Naomi, thanks for your reporting. John, thanks for planting that seed. We should talk more about this idea of deploying a cadre of tutors all over the country to try and help make up for some of the lost time. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank all of you out there.
Thank you as always.
Thanks to at home.
Thanks for watching.
Thank you so much for letting us into your homes during these extraordinary times.